Welcome everyone to Textiles and Tea with the Handweavers Guild of America. I'm Kathy Group. I'm the Advertising and Marketing Manager for HGA, and I'm your host today. Today we are sponsored by Denise Kovnat. Thank you, Denise. We appreciate you sponsoring us today. It's wonderful to have you do that for us. Just a reminder that you need to use the questions and not the chat. I can't see the questions very well in chat, but I'd love to see your questions, and also keep that chat coming. We'd like to hear your comments. We are broadcasting from Convergence today, and for those who've been here know it's been an interesting Convergence in some ways. And I just have to warn you, we just had a fire alarm, so we had to leave the building. Let's hope it doesn't happen again. Today we want to welcome our guest speaker, Ann Richards. Ann has trained and worked as a biologist before studying woven textiles at West Surrey College of Art and Design. Now she's also worked as a lecturer. Her background in biology feeds her textile work, which often draws on natural forms and uses contrast of fiber and yarn twists to create highly textured and elastic fabrics. She has exhibited widely in the United States, and in 1989 she won the first prize in the International Textile Design Contest in Tokyo. So she's very international. I misspoke. She has exhibited widely throughout the U.S. I mean throughout the world, not the U.S. Her work is in many public collections, including the Craft Studies Center, the UK Design Museum in Denmark, the Deutsches Technikmuseum. Over the last 20 years, she has lectured and given workshops in the UK and elsewhere, including Europe, Scandinavia, and the US and Canada. She has published 2 books, Weaving Textiles That Shape Themselves and Weaving Structure and Substance. Welcome, Ann. How are you?
I'm okay, but I think I'm having trouble with my video.
Well, remember that button that said switch cameras?
Yeah.
Can you hit that again? There you go. Hi.
Is that okay?
You're great. Welcome.
Okay. Oh, right. I'm there at last.
There you are. Well, we got to start off, and since you're from the UK, this is a very good question. What is your favorite tea?
Oh, well, you might think we're all great tea drinkers, but I'm really much more of a coffee drinker. So I don't drink any sort of black tea. I really go for herb tea. So I'd have to say my favorite tea is peppermint.
Oh, good, good. Would you share with us how you got started in fiber?
Well, it's funny because I've been asked this question before, of course, and partly by Stacey Harvey Brown, who did a series about weavers. And I had to sit down and really think about it, and ended up saying to her, well, you know, to be honest, I actually got started in fibre by taking up metalwork, which is a sort of slightly roundabout route, but I've sort of come back to jewellery. But I started when I was working as a biology technician. I started doing some evening classes in my spare time. I wanted to do a craft, but actually I didn't want to do textiles. I'd done some fibre work when I was young. I'd done some embroidery, and my mother had taught me to make clothes and things like this. But I didn't really want to do that. I wanted to do something I wasn't allowed to do as a girls' school. You know, there was no wood, there was no metal, nothing like that. So I thought, no, I don't want to do fibre crafts. I want to do metalwork. And I did some silksmithing, and then I did some jewellery. But there was also a weaving class in the same institute. And I started just sort of looking in and thinking, well, actually, it does look quite interesting. And so one time I signed up for that. And of course, after that, I was hooked. You know, I think I had this idea that metalwork would be more kind of rigorous, I suppose. But of course, as soon as I got into weave, I realized that weaving really is rigorous, but it's just in a different kind of way. And so after that, I became really, really keen on weaving in my spare time, while I was still a biology technician. But then I went to a summer school at the Surrey Institute. Well, it was West Surrey College of Art, and then it became Surrey Institute and kept changing its name. I went on a summer school there, with Mary Restio, the ICAT artist. And she could see that I was really interested. And she said, why don't you really want to do this, don't you? Why don't you sign up for a course here? And so that's how I became a student at the college. But the interesting thing, perhaps you'll be asking me about this later, but the interesting thing was that because I'd done quite a bit of weaving already, I'd already had the experience of weaving something that I thought was going to be flat. And then it had pleated itself up in a rather rough and ready kind of way. And of course, I wasn't very pleased at the time, but as I thought about it, I got quite interested. Why does this happen? Can I control it? Can I make nice fine pleats rather than these rather, coarse and not very attractive pleats? So the point was, I arrived at the college with a ready-made problem that I wanted to solve, that while I was there. Yes, okay, I said, while I'm here, I'm going to get to the bottom of this. So that's how I really, how I got into fibre. So it's a bit of a sort of roundabout route, really.
Were there teachers on staff who were able to tell you, or did you just explore it and figure it out for yourself?
Well, I had to figure it out for myself, but I had a wonderful tutor, and she was very interested in the fact that I'd come from a science background, which at times I did feel, because many of the students could draw so well, had such a good feeling for colour and things, I sometimes felt a little bit out of place. And at one time I said to her, sometimes I think I'm just trying to do science in an art college. And she said, that's okay, that's absolutely fine. But what she said was, she was a very, very good tutor who would ask each student what they were really interested in, get to the bottom of it, and then she could really individually give them a little nudge in the right direction. So she said to me, how would you find this out if this was a problem in biology? And of course, what I would have done was I'd do an experiment and I'd see what the result was. And in the light of that experiment, I think I'd then say, well, what shall I do now? What's the next question? What have I learnt so far? And she just said, treat it like you would a problem in science. And so I did have to work it out for myself, but I did have an awful lot of support and guidance to do it. Yeah.
Well, that's an interesting comment, because I'm amazed how many people I've had on the show that have a science or a math background. And that's one example of how I think they work together, that the arts and the science can be very similar, is that's how you figure out problems. But how else do you think, what do you think is the other relationships between sciences and the fine arts, or especially weaving?
Well, it's interesting because you're right, I've met, there's been doctors, geneticists, microbiologists, computer scientists, they're all into it. And I do think the link is this thing that, when I first took up weaving, people actually said to me, oh, this is rather different from what you did before. And I said, oh, no, it isn't. This experimenting, getting the feedback and moving on is very much similar in the science and the arts. But it is an interesting question, why fibre? Because that, in principle, that applies to all design work, I think, this way of working forwards. But I think in fibre, you do see people who are, it's funny because I'm not actually that good at maths, but people, the calculations, I think are an issue. People struggle with weaving if they can't do sort of basic calculations and things like this, and certainly all the working out the amount of material you need, dye stuffs, all these sort of things, they do require that kind of precision, I think. But I suppose the other thing is maybe it's a sort of sense of pattern. I've heard mathematicians say, maths is all about pattern, I say I'm no good at maths, and they say it's just you're getting bogged down in these formulae and things, but it's not really about that. It's about pattern, which not necessarily pattern in the sense of patterns on textiles, but just the pattern of the way things are happening. You see a pattern of what causes what, and I think that's the link that makes so many people come in from science and come into textiles.
Well, you've talked I talked about in your introduction, your relationship between biology and nature and weaving. So do you think that biology influences your weaving? Do you think it's because you studied biology, or do you think that interest in nature was always there?
But I think the interest in nature was always there from quite a small child. I kept sort of all sorts of pets. I mean, not just fluffy things, like lizards and things like this. Which, yes, there's some nice pictures there. Yeah, well, yes, I was interested from early on, but I think it's because I was always interested that I then went into, I did a biology degree and then carried on working in science until I just got sort of hooked by weaving. So yes, I think the link goes on, but I think the thing that struck me about the interest in biology is that a lot of people are influenced by how beautiful nature is and the patterns and colours of nature. But the thing that particularly interests me is the structural aspects of it. So you've got a nice picture there of the dragonfly wing. So I was very interested in the way, not just as pleating in the dragonfly wing, but how it's possible to have such a delicate structure and still make the pleats firm enough, stiff enough to maintain their form. And of course, it's these little struts that run across the wings that enable you to make quite a delicate fabric. So I basically, I just copied this idea from the dragonfly. If you want your pleats to stay there, you need something firm. You can have a delicate fabric, but somewhere there's got to be something like a little struts that give you the body to the fabric. Otherwise, your pleats just sort of, they don't have enough form to them. So I think it's the influence for me is the sort of structural things in nature. I mean, it's how it looks, but also the structural things that sort of underpin how things look. So that's that's the full size, that's the dragonfly pleat scarf, yeah, that I made after looking at the dragonfly wing.
I can't imagine that. That's such a great conversion from a bug into it's amazing that you were able to do that, and it makes good sense when you explain it. I would have never thought of that, but it makes great sense. Now, you're really well known for structure, all the beautiful structures that you make. So can you talk some about where does color fit into your work?
Now, well, it's very interesting. When I was at college, for the whole first year, I basically worked with unbleached linen, sometimes bleached linen, uncolored, undyed silk, tussar silk, and made some really, things I was quite pleased with. And at the end of the year and the assessment, the tutors were quite pleased. They said, well, yeah, we're quite pleased with what you're doing. You're doing some nice things, but have you ever thought of using colour at all in your work? So I completely neglected this entire sort of aspect of textiles. So basically, I was really a structural person and not a colour person. But my tutor, who was so good, said to me, look, the way into this is you're really interested in texture, but you can use colour to play the texture up. And so this is it, the picture you're showing now. This was when I got on top of this, how to make these pleats, which is what is now very, very well known as turn twill pleats. But of course, when I was doing this, nobody could tell me why this was happening. So I had to work it out for myself. But you see, she encouraged me here. So this idea on the peaks of the pleats, I'll use a stronger color or a lighter, brighter color, and then a deeper color in the recesses. And that just plays up the structure. So that was the way that got me into color. And of course, once I started on it, I did get more interested in color and the way colors mix and things like that. So that was very important as a sort of way into it. And of course, now that I'm doing more of a sharp-edged pleats like the dragonfly one, I tend to use bright colors on the edges of the pleats, so they sort of really stand out. So, and sometimes different colors on the sides of the pleats. So as you move the piece, you get more impression of the depth. So I'm still doing the same thing, using the color to sort of emphasize the structure. But of course, the other thing I began to realize once you did get into color like this, of course, a fabric like this is different on the two sides, you see, and that's something that I really like very much. But also, as I got into color mixing, the other thing where I do really like color is I love doing iridescent effects, where you put a very, very contrasting colors across one another. I really enjoy that very much. So I didn't start out as a color person, but I've sort of become a bit of a color person along the way.
Yeah, so like some of those pieces at the beginning that we showed, they have that beautiful red in it. So it's like, it's almost like you may not use a lot of color, but what you use is bold and very striking.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you have stated that, and you've kind of talked about this already, but you may have to retell your story. It's a great story, that an apparent failure can form the germ of a new idea. So can you talk some more about that and kind of expand on that story about your first mistake?
Yes, the first mistake. You see, I sometimes say to people, what my entire career as a textured weaver is based on a beginner's mistake, a really obvious, silly mistake. Well, the kind of thing you do if you don't know anything about it, really, which was I was just doing scarves, which were stripes of 1 and 3 and 3 and 1 twill along the length. And then I went over into little blocks, reversing blocks at the borders. And I wove this scarf with commercial spun silk in both warp and weft. And I was just after the reflections as you get from the warp and the weft floats. And they were perfectly nice. And then I thought, well, I want a bit of a change. I'll use my own hand spun tussar silk as the weft. And that was the one, because of course, being a beginner spinner, I mean, even as a singles yarn, there might have been enough twist to do it. But as a beginner, I was putting much too much twist on my yarn. And so I made, without realizing it, I made a special high twist yarn. And of course, the ends of the scarf, where I got reversing sort of dice pattern, that stayed flat, but the middle all buckled up. And of course, I was just, being a beginner, I was just horrified, actually. I wasn't at all pleased that the chance had handed me this wonderful opportunity, and I was just very fed up. But of course, in considering it after a while, I realized that you should pay attention to mistakes like that and be ready for them. I mean, and of course, after a while, I came round thinking from the science side, the great French chemist Louis Pasteur was talking about the influence of chance. And it's not just kind of letting chance happen and accepting it, but seeing that chance can do something for you. And he said, chance favors only the prepared mind. And I think that's a really good thing. You should be ready for chance things that happen. Even if they're not what you want at the time, they are something that you can use maybe later on when you've had time to digest them and think how, it may spoil the piece you're working on. And certainly the other thing it taught me, because this happened on a scarf that I made, the other thing it taught me was to always try things out on a small sample first before you make the big piece.
Well, I love that mistake, and the world loves that mistake because it took you to a place that it's shared with us. So that's a wonderful thing. And speaking of which, you have a new book called Weaving Structure and Substance, and It's coming out like next month, right? It's coming out the 1st of August.
That's right. Yes. Yeah.
And so you've already written one book. So what was the catalyst to write a second? Writing a book's a lot of work. So
well, that's a good point, because I think it took me several years to recover from the first one, because I hadn't really. That's the first one I'd ever done, and I got all these notes that I used for the students at college and things, and I thought, I'll just sort of flesh these out a bit, it'll be fine. But yes, another beginner's mistake. So yes, I was amazed at how much work it is to get everything right, and you just keep writing. I'd write something and think that's done, and the next morning I'd read it and think, no, still not quite there, and everything. So, but fortunately, I think I've got quite a good editor at the publishers, and so she waited a bit, and then in 2018 she sort of contacted me and said, what have you thought about, would you like to do another one? And of course, by then I'd had a time to sort of recover and think all the new things that I'd learned. And I mean, one of the most interesting things about the turn twills, which obviously one of the things I tried to do was to research back and see what precedents there were for that. And I was not really turning up very much. I mean, there's a diagram in Watson's Textile Design and Colour of exactly that structure called dimity, and it's a fabric with a sort of slightly ridged texture. So he was writing in 1912. So I thought, well, okay, it probably goes back to the 19th century. And then I couldn't really find anything earlier. And then a couple of years before my editor contacted me, I'd been contacted by an archaeologist in the Netherlands who said, I've read your book. Would you weave some samples for us for an exhibition, to replicate some early textiles about our exhibition about pleating? And so she wanted the turned twills. And I said, but surely they don't go back that far, do they? And she sent me a picture of turned twills, this time 1 and 2 and 2 and 1 twill, from about 600 AD.
Really?
And then of course where I'd gone wrong was the archaeologists have a special term for these. They're called Rippenkörper, which means ribbed twill.
They're called
Rippenkörper is German term. The archaeologist who studied this was German. He gave it that term. I think now people are starting to call it things like barred damask. But anyway, once I got this search term, I found it all over the place. And of course, it turned out the complex weavers had a medieval group who knew all about this. I just didn't know what they knew, So, but that was very interesting. And now the further excavations have pushed this back to the 2nd century AD. So I think what foxed me was this technique went on until about the 1100s, and then it just fell out of use. And so that's like got an 800-year gap. And that's why, once you've gone back so far, you think it won't get back further. But that was obviously a mistake, that it was a technique that fell out of use and then got revived again. So, because things like that, I thought, if I'd known, I'd have put that in the first book. And then other things I'd done, I thought, if I'd had a chance to try that, I'd have put that in the first book. And so it kind of went on like that. So that was the impetus. And also, the other thing was I wanted to try to write a slightly different kind of book, because the first one was very much specifically on the high twist and what I know. But the second one, as I worked on it, I realized I wanted to pick up some of the things I'd put in expand on the things in the last chapter of the first book. And also it's connected to the kind of way we used to teach the course at Farnham, where the college was, because sometimes we'd have something which we called a technical module, which I usually teach, where you'd ask the students to choose a single structure. And then, not just a single drop, but like twills or something, or a sort of family of weaves, and work on that for several weeks, 4 or 5 weeks, just to push it around and see all the different things they could do with it, how different they could make it using different materials and things like that. So that was sort of one way, and you could start from the materials, the resources of materials. And then we had other modules where we would have a project where we'd take them out to somebody's house and they'd be given a brief to design particular things for that person, for that house. And then, of course, they had their sketchbooks where they had their own ideas. So sometimes you were coming from the materials and sometimes you were coming from the idea. And I thought, well, I don't think I've seen anybody do a weaving book like that. And yet that was the structure of our course, that coming from these different directions. And I thought, well, I'd like to structure a book really about that. And so that's what the book is like. It breaks down into these different sections. Firstly, about looking at nature as inspiration, then saying the resources. I've got these resources, a structure, a material, what can I do with them? And then there's a section saying, supposing you know what you want. You want a double-sided fabric or you want a pleated fabric. Supposing you know that, what are all the ways you can get it? So sometimes I'm coming in from design from one side, and sometimes I'm tackling design from the other side. So that was the idea of it, really.
Well, I can't wait to see it. And we have posted in the chat the link to, it's a Crowwood Books. It's a division of, and I'm
IPG, yes, I think.
Yeah,
yes, I told you the wrong publisher, the wrong distributor the other day.
Yeah. So it's Crowwood Books. It is out of England. But you will be able to get the books there. And unfortunately, I don't think we know who's going to carry it in the US, right? So.
Oh yeah, it's IPG.
Okay.
It is. Yeah, it's on their website now. I had to look,
I saw that.
and I had a trouble. I couldn't find their forthcoming books, but I found it in the end. And they do say it's the 1st of August. So if you go on their website, you can IPG. It's wrote it down somewhere. I think it's IPG book. All in one word, book.com. That's their website. Yeah.
Okay. So you can get it there, and
yeah.
long
It's
before.
better than buying it from Europe because the postage is just crazy, you know.
Yeah, and I'm sure your favorite weaving store will be carrying it soon. So that's another thing. But the other thing I want to talk to you about is about your book, both of them. And maybe this is just my own personal experience, but it felt like when I started reading your book, it opened up a whole new world of weaving, because there's plain weave, and then there's twill, and now there's all this movement and structure and everything. So when and you talked about the twist of the yarn, using steel with the silk, differential shrinkage, all of those things were kind of opened up in your book. So how do you encourage weavers not to get kind of overwhelmed with all the different avenues they can take? Does that make sense?
Well, yeah, I know that's a difficult one, but I think it is for sort of all textiles, and I'm familiar with that as a teacher, very much so, particularly with beginner weavers. They do a little sample warp, and you look at them all, and we say which ones you're interested in. They choose one, then they do another warp, and then they get lots of possibilities there, and they choose one of them. And there's a sort of about, I don't know, a few weeks into the course that you sort of see it dawning on them. They'll never have time to do all these things, and they look slightly, because the expression that comes off their face when they realize they'll never have enough time to do it all. So I just think there isn't any complete solution to that. And of course, the high twist, it is that much more difficult because it's so unpredictable. You make some small change and you can't be sure what it will do until you wet finish it. And so the only thing I can say to people is, you just got to accept you never will be able to do it all. And you've just got to sort of hang on to, once you feel you're really interested in one, kind of focus on that. Don't try and do everything, because you obviously can't do everything. But the other thing, the real thing, is sampling and cutting off and wet finishing. Yeah, because I would find students, they would keep weaving and weaving and weaving, and I say, aren't you going to cut it off? And then even worse, they cut some off and pile them up behind. I said, why, you haven't wet finished this? Oh, I'm going to do that tomorrow. And yet they were weaving again. And I said, how do you know what to do next if you don't know what's happened yet? So sampling is the absolute key to it, particularly with these high twist yarns. It's the only way to sort of not be overwhelmed, because otherwise you're not, if you're not getting any feedback, you can't get a kind of a sort of sense of direction that you can home in on. You start to see something really interesting happening. And I think at that point, the thing is to home in on that and not try to do too many different things. Try to get that one really working, because once you've got one thing really working, you can obviously, if you can diversify it. But if you have tried too many things, a lot of things just won't work with high twist yarns. Like the fabric's a bit too close, nothing will happen. You crammed it in too close. But you see, if you don't cut off and finish, what you want to do, if I do something completely, by now I've got a bit of an idea what would usually happen, but if I want to do something that's relatively new and I'm not sure what will happen, I'll only weave one or two samples, because it might be that the whole set is wrong, it's too close or it's too open, and I'm not even in with a chance of what I want to do. So I think that's the sort of key to it, is to cut off frequently. I know people often hate to do that, but what I normally do is I use a sort of, I don't know if people in America, that a sort of lashing on system, and it is in my first book, that you tie little knots and you lash on, and then you really don't waste much, because people hate the idea, if you tie it on to the front with the yarn itself, every time you cut off, you're wasting yarn. But with these little do little slip knots, you hardly waste anything. So it's easier to accept the idea you're going to keep cutting off. But I don't know, people say they don't, some people say they don't like sampling, but I just love sampling. And sometimes I just can't wait to cut it off and see what happens. It's so exciting. But so you're a non-sampler, are you? Well, you know what I say in my first book? In my opinion, if you make a big piece and you don't know what's going to happen, you're just making a very, very large sample, aren't you? It's true also that because I tend to try to make really tiny samples, sort of, I got told off at college about making these really, really tiny samples. And I thought it's my scientific background. I want to do a proof of concept one. I don't want to waste too much time, materials. Just am I in with a chance with this idea? But of course, it does mean when the first piece that you do, although I'm not going to do a big piece until I've got a pretty good idea of what's happening, you're still going to learn more on the big piece because the big piece is going to, behave in different ways. I mean, it's like the dragonfly pleat scarf. I mean, I knew what was going to happen from a small piece. But when I got a big piece, I was just interested in the way it behaved, because it would pleat up really tight, and that was quite nice for going around your neck because I'm quite small, so I don't like too much, bulk around my neck. But then they fan out at the ends. And of course, it was that really got me the idea of that I might do jewellery, the fanning ends. I thought, oh, it could be like a ruff. It could be like an Elizabethan ruff. And that's how the dragonfly pleat scarf sort of transitioned into being jewellery.
Well, you are a spinner, correct? Aren't you a spinner?
I can spin. I mean, I don't do a lot of spinning now, but one thing was obviously I had sort of managed to spin some yarn that caused all the trouble in the first place and sort of got me into this. But I'd been on a short course of spinning, but we did learn to spin quite well at college. We had somebody who was a very excellent spinner. So we did long draw for wool, and then we were taught to spin linen and things like that. And that was a great help. So I haven't spun a lot of yarn, but what I did start to do was, because I then understood the principle of it, was that because it was very difficult in the early days to get high twist yarns, we did have some at college, but not that many. Once you understand what you're doing with the spinning wheel, it's very easy, quick and easy to sort of bump the yarn up, put more twist on. So you get it up to those kind of levels where it's going to react as, it's going to have enough twist on to react. So I did do that. And that's been useful so I spent more time actually bumping up yarns, put more twist on than actually spinning from scratch. Though I have done some spinning from scratch, partly in connection with a project I did about pleating in the possibility of pleating in ancient Egypt. So you see, I like the archaeologists. If an archaeologist asks me to try something, I'm right up for it, So I do a little bit of spinning, but I'm not really a spinner. I wouldn't say I was really a spinner.
Would you encourage people to at least take a spinning class to better understand the passive versus the active yarns?
I think the other thing is if people are interested in spinning, it gives them the opportunity to make exactly what they want. You can choose the fibre that you want, and you can spin it to exactly the twist that you want. I mean, the thing that was interesting to me while I was at college was because we had some high twist yarns, and they were woolen yarns, and they were not very, very fine, and they had a certain number of turns per inch. And then we bought in some much finer yarn, and that had a different number of turns per inch, but it was very much finer. And then I thought, well, how do I know which one is really the most twisted? And that was very important, the fact that I was interested in the process of spinning. And the college had a lot of industrial texts as well as handweavers texts. And I found the industrial texts were very instructive on how you related turns per inch to what is really fundamental, that the angle of twist is the real issue. The turns per inch, I mean, obviously a fine yarn is going to need more twist to have the same properties. So the angle of twist is the really fundamental thing. And so one of the things I wanted to put in the first book was these kind of formulae that I was getting from the industrial books that, as far as I could see, never appeared in handweavers books. I thought that was kind of an important thing to relate these aspects of twist. So it was important. Yeah, it made a lot of difference to me that I was a spinner. Yeah. Or at least I could spin. I'm not a wonderful spinner, I suppose that's what I'm saying. Someone who's a really expert spinner would say, you're not much of a spinner. But yeah.
Well, you mentioned a while ago about making jewelry again, and I think it's lovely that you've kind of come full circle, right? Because you started out with jewelry, and now you're coming back to that with weaving, right? And I had to show this piece because I absolutely love it. So can you talk some about how the whole returning back to jewelry and what that's been like?
Yeah, well, this is, yeah, right. You did right. That's the sort of critical piece, really, because I made the dragonfly pleat scarf, which is linen with crepe silk going across it to create the pleating. And then when I was in Denmark, I joined the Yarn Purchasing Society in Denmark. They buy unusual yarns in bulk and distribute them to the members, because it's very hard for hand weavers to buy small amounts of these yarns. So that's how I came across the silk steel yarn. And I thought, well, it's lovely. It's, you know, it's bendable and everything. It's really interesting, but what shall I do with this? And then I got an invitation to do an exhibition on new technology and materials, you see, and you know what it's like if you get an invitation, you think, oh, I must miss this, I must make something. And I thought, well, I'll just make a scarf that's the same as the dragonfly scarf, but the same structure, but I'll use this new silk steel yarn. And this is the piece that resulted. So of course I realized that you can bend it sharply, and because of the metal in it, the silk, it's like it's a strand of silk with a very, very fine steel wire running through it. They're twisted really quite tightly together. And it's really nice because it's sort of somewhere poised between normal textile material and wire. It's not as stiff as wire, but it's got this kind of memory. So of course I made this piece and I bent it round like this, as you see. And this was a piece that I sent off to the exhibition. And of course, you can see it in a way I'd arranged it thinking, well, you'd wear this like a scarf, but although it looks quite interesting laid out like that, it isn't really scarf material. And of course, I twigged that I'd had this idea about making a ruff, but I didn't really have the material to do it. And here was the material. So it was a sort of, I had an idea and I had to wait for the material to kind of catch up with me, the suitable material. And so after that, I started to make the neck pieces, and that silk steel fabric has this sort of moldable quality. So first of all, I just did simple radiating pieces, but because of the moldability, I could push it in, and the center part around your neck would stay in place and it would fan out, which I don't think I could have got linen to do that. It wouldn't have stayed in position. But of course, I started to put in chevron bends and things like this because it's so malleable. So basically the pieces I make now, the radiating pleats are the kind of natural pleats from the high twist yarn, and the anything else bends in other places are from the fact that the thing's got a sort of memory for where you put it. So that's how the pieces that I've been doing more recently are made. Except for the very latest things, which when I started to, with all these bends and folds and things, it all started to look a bit kind of origami-like. And I thought, well, actually, I'm quite interested in origami. I'll really look at that. And so the origami pieces actually sort of fold themselves up. So I don't need the silk steel to make the origami pieces work, but I do often still use it because it's just so nice and stiff. But that would work even just with linen, because it's due to, well, this is something I've got a big section on this in the new book. It's using a traditional origami V-fold, and this relies on the fact that you've got mountain and valley folds, and then you can reverse them so they're the other way around. But then you have a bit where you've got everything doing the same thing, a bit where they're all mountain folds, and this causes the paper to sort of, it would cause the paper to sort of buckle. But if you put a V fold in, then everything falls into place nicely. And basically, I'm simply doing that in weaving, but all I have to do is weave the cords, and then it V folds itself. If I position the cords correctly, I don't have to bend it. I don't have to make it do it. I just let it do it, and then I just crisp it up a little bit to, tighten it up. But I don't have to. So actually, I had somebody at someone who came round to an open studio, and I explained all this, and he turned out to be, and he was an engineer, so he's quite interested. But when I explained about the self-folding origami, he said, but you're cheating at origami.
Cheating? That's weird.
Well, the fact you should have, if you're doing it in paper, you've got to actually make all these folds, whereas I just weave in the key stress points and then put it in the water, and then it does it itself.
I'm going to have to get a book about that. Why, wait, I know where I can get one. Now, one of the things I was reading a bunch of articles that people have written about you, and one of them, she talked about Annie Albers, and she referred to your work when she was talking about Annie Albers. And then later on, they were talking about how she had at one time decided that she was just going to do what she called wall art and not functional art. Now you do both. So which do you think really speaks to you? What is central to you of those two?
Well, I think deep down, I'm really a functional weaver. I love working to make them work. But you see, of course, I mean, Albus, she was fantastic. She could do it all. I mean, the functional textiles are unbelievable, but then the personal textiles are incredibly beautiful. But for me, I think I do fundamentally, I do love making the functional things. But of course, you don't always want to be every minute of the time be worrying about how it's going to work. Sometimes you just want to play. And I think the jewelry has given me more opportunity to do that, because some of the pieces are quite big and sort of sculptural. And I've even had people say they remind them of architectural models of some sort of, modernist building or something like this, some of the bigger pieces. So I've got a little bit more leeway to, be a little bit more artistic, but I do still like to make them wearable. I mean, even the big pieces, they do fit on you. They do sit nicely on the neck. I like to make it all work, as well as having that a little bit more freedom to make things that are a bit more bold and not quite so constrained by being down to earth functional, because after all, jewelry pieces are decorative in any case. So yeah, it gives me a little bit more leeway, but at heart, I'm probably really a functional weaver rather than an art weaver. Yeah.
So what's next for you? You just finished a book. Now what?
Now what? Well, all the things I didn't have time to do because because in the book, I did want to cover quite a range of topics. I wanted to give quite a lot of examples about how you could take one structure and you could, in some cases, make it almost completely unrecognizable. You see, I mean, my favorite one, well, you'll see if you see my book, my very favorite one is lino, which people think of mainly as light and gauzy. And my tutor gave me this amazing piece, which you just would not believe is lino. And I just thought that's so important, the fact that fabrics that are identical in terms of interlacement can be so very, very different. Uh-huh. But I did want to cover quite a lot of things like that. And of course, as I experimented with that, I turned up things and I thought, I'd love to do more of that. But I've got to finish this book, I've got to move on to the next topic. I've done enough of that for the book. I can't go on and on and on. And particularly towards the end, I'd already written more than they'd actually asked for, and I just, had got to stop. So in a way, I want to go back on some of the things where I got to an interesting point. And sometimes I'd only got as far as about doing samples. And I thought, well, that's enough to explain to people what I'm on about with this. I haven't got time to make a big piece. I've got to, move on to the next topic. So there are loads of things that I'd like to do more of, but two particular ones I'm really interested in. One is the lino, which I just can't believe what you can do with lino. It's just incredible. And the other one I really got interested, I sort of touched on it in the first book, but I put more in the second book. The idea of not simply getting the fabrics textured, but using the yarn so that you start out with a rectangle and then in the finishing it shapes itself. And the idea, I'm interested in the sort of loom to body cloth where you have minimal cutting, minimal sewing. And the idea of zero waste fashion is, I think, a big topic at the moment because people realize, 15% of the fabric goes to waste with conventional cutting because you're cutting out shapes and, having to discard bits. And so I think people are interested in that. Most of the people who are working on that are interested in economical ways of laying out the cutting. And there's some fantastic things going on like that. So I'm following various people on the internet who are doing these amazing tessellated layouts so you don't waste a single bit of fabric. But my own particular interest is this idea of using the yarns to shape it. So I would weave rectangles, but then they wouldn't finish up as rectangles. And so that's what I did a bit in the book, but there wasn't time to do more. So now the book is finished. Now I can play with that, and also with the lino. And of course, I think the lino is a lovely fabric for clothing as well. So these are two sort of separate topics, one on each loom. But I think they're sort of kind of going to join up eventually, probably at some point. So I'll have some shaped lino clothes or something like that. Yeah.
Well,
so
we
I think
look forward to seeing it.
That's where I'm going at the moment.
And we look forward to seeing that. All right, we got tons of questions, so I'm going to go there now.
Okay.
First is from Sharon Alderman. She says,
"Oh, Sharon,
this is good to see you and hear you."
I've referred to her in my book because she's got a wonderful bit about keeping records. She's nailed it for keeping records.
Oh, really?
She says something like that she's sending this information to her future self, to whom she feels kindly, and she doesn't want her to work any harder than she has to.
Yeah.
I put that in the book because I thought that's the perfect way to explain people why they should keep proper records.
Well, she wants you to know she's already ordered your book.
Oh, right.
So there you go. And she's not the only one. Several people have already posted that they've ordered your book while you talk. This is from Kristen Hall. Hello, fellow biologists turning in from the lab. What a niche of biology research did you work in? And does it factor into your art aesthetic?
Well, it's interesting. I mainly worked on invertebrates at the time when I was in biology, so not really things like insects. In fact, I didn't really do much on insects at college. I sort of got interested in them later on. But I think you can see the structural elements that are important in biology at every scale of organism. And so part of the time I was doing marine biology. So I'm certainly quite interested in things like shells and the structures of shells and the interesting textures and things that you get. So partly it's a little bit the speciality I had, but it's broader than that, yeah.
Sue Zari wants to know, hi Sue, will you talk about the looms in your stable?
Right, I've got two looms. I've got a little countermarch, 8-shaft countermarch loom, which is a Glimocra loom, and then I've got a Dobby loom. And I don't know, you some of you will know Jeff Wilson, who made he had a firm called Syrefco with his wife, and I bought a Swedish loom frame, and he made this device, this Syrefco Dobby that runs on punch paper, and I bought that years and years ago, and I've been using that ever since. I'm still using that. That's 16 shafts, and it means the punch paper I can use the rolls. They last quite a long time, and so that's what I'm using there. So at the moment, my countermarch loom, I've actually got that set up permanently for lino, which basically means I've put in some bars so that the yarn comes in, the whip threads come in a particular level. And I pushed all the spare heddles out of the way because you don't need many heddles for lino, but I sort of left it like that for the moment. I've been weaving lino on that for several months now. And then I'm using the Dobby loom for the more structural things where I'm doing this kind of trying to do the zero waste clothing, which is through fabric shaping. That's on the Dobby loom. Yeah.
Gail Valance wants to know, is your necklace made by you?
This one. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
I don't know. Can you see?
Yeah.
So the idea of this is the pleating means that you can stretch them. So it's always a problem if you use textiles for jewelry, I think, the fastening, because you wouldn't want to use the kind of metal fastenings that I was accustomed, the jewelry findings that you use for metal jewelry, that when I was doing jewelry work, it wouldn't have made any sense to do that because they're so heavy. So the pleating was a good solution because they're you can stretch them. So actually, I've got the other thing I do little bracelets as well, so people can see that one.
Ooh.
So I do this is also the silk steel, though it wouldn't actually have to be. So apart from the neck pieces, I do little bracelets which are made from little sections that are then sort of offset. Some of the big neck pieces are constructed like that. You showed one at the beginning where I'm using several sections and throwing them off, letting them flip out in different directions. Yeah.
Fazia Rizvi wants to know, how does time affect the structure of your wovens? How does time affect it? You know, does it start losing its twist over time?
Oh, right. Oh, I see. Sorry. No, what happens is that the more you pull them on and off, like I just did then, they'll gradually slacken. But then when you put them in the water, they'll just shrink back up again because the twist is still there. So in a way, it lasts. I mean, I've got some that I've had for years and years and years, and they're still fine. Okay. So in a way, high twist yarn is longer last. I mean, everything wears, all textiles wear out in the end, but they're longer lasting than elastomeric yarns, you know, lycra and things like that, which obviously they tend to sort of give up quite quickly, and that's partly because I think they react to. I mean, the trouble with lycra is people use it for swimwear and it doesn't like chlorine and things, but you know, lycra things do tend to slacken, but the high twist things, it's just a temporary thing. It's a bit like a crepe-on fabric, which can crush or seat out. When you wash it, the crinkles all come back again. That's how it works. Yeah.
Brian Murphy, Randall Darwell's husband, recently said, Randy was dazzled by Anne's technical skills and the beauty of her pieces. Tour de force. That was nice. Thank you, Brian.
Yeah, thank you.
Sarah Bennett wants to know, could you speak about the kinds of fibers that work for high twist textiles?
Well, the issue about twist is the reason that you get the reaction is because it's natural fibers that are the best, although you can also use rayon, because they swell when they get wet. So what you've got is with the high twist yarn, if you think of it, it's very, very, very tightly twisted. It's under stress. And even when they're dry, often these, if you let go of them, they'll twist around themselves a bit to sort of release the stress. But of course, they're highly twisted. When you put them into water, all the fibers swell up and the thing's already under stress. So you're putting on more stress. And that's why you get this triggering reaction when it gets wet. You've increased the stress on the yarn. So that means all the natural fibers will work. I mean, they're different characteristics, because something like a woolen spun yarn will tend to crinkle very, very tightly, whereas a linen yarn, it's still reactive, but it tends to sort of try to move in quite big spirals. So they all have different characteristics. Rayon will work because it's a reconstituted yarn, you know, it's cellulose. Right. But the synthetic yarns, things like nylon and things, the thing about them is their fibers don't swell when they get wet, so you can't make a crepe reaction, crepe fabric out of them. Of course, where they can, you know, what's been done with synthetic yarns is to make things that shrink for other reasons, you know, that they're heat sensitive and so forth. But dependent on the twist, it's a natural fiber or a regenerated fiber that you need. Yeah.
Have you experimented with hemp?
With
hemp?
Hemp. I've got some hemp yarn, but I haven't used it high twist. But I've used high twist linen. I just haven't been able to get any high twist hemp yarn. Yeah, but yes, that would work. But I say, because they're quite, the thing is, what the yarn's doing when you look at it, sort of after it's shrunk, it looks like it's just going crinkly. But strictly speaking, it's trying to move in a spiral. And when it's actually in the fabric, you can, if you follow a thread through, you can see it's actually going in a spiral. So of course, as I was saying, if it's a soft yarn, it can go in a small spiral. But if it's stiff, it's like trying to roll up a big hose pipe or something. You know, if something's too stiff, there's a limit to how tightly you can coil it. It's going to go in a big spiral like that. So the bust fibers like hemp and linen and so forth, they would tend to make quite a bold texture, and things like woolen spun yarn or fine silk will make quite a fine crinkle. I mean, that's why the classic kind of crepe fabric in silk is a very, very fine crinkle, usually because they're very, very fine yarns, but also they can crinkle quite tightly.
We got so many questions. I'm not sure which one to do. Denise Covenant said hi.
Oh, hi, Denise. Thank you, Denise.
Earlier, Denise is the sponsor of this episode, and she wanted to talk about. She said, "How do you achieve the precision in your origami folds? I know that you're changing treadling blocks basically from 1-3 to 3-1, but you achieve a fold that stands up to 90 degrees from the previous block." She wanted to know, is it by the kind of yarns you've chosen?
Actually, I don't know if you can see, if I hold this up, this is a loom state, a kind of piece of origami. And it says what I'm doing is that, actually I should have brought some paper paper folds down. I'm weaving a bit at the top. It's mountain and valley, and then I've got a bit where they're both mountain folds, and then I go to a bit where they've swapped over, and so I'm weaving in these cords, and then where I overlap, what happens is they'll fight, you see, and the fabric will sort of flip over like that, because I've got a little bit where they're both doing the same thing, and the fabric doesn't like that. So I mean, that's what it starts out like. And this is a piece that this is a similar kind of piece. That's what's happened after it's been washed. So she's right that they're quite sharp folds, but what makes the difference is how much of an overlap there is. Because if there's only a little bit of an overlap, it will be quite shallow, and if it's more of an overlap, it'll be more of a right angle. I mean, the thing to look at all this origami, there's some super books by Paul Jackson, the origami artist, called Folding for Designers, one of them, and the other one, he did another one called Pleats, and he goes into all these details about the different ways of folding. But yeah, in terms of the angle, how sharp an angle it is, it depends on the amount of overlap where you have everything doing the same thing before you swap over, and that creates that kind of instability that flips it. Yeah. Anyway, it's all in the book.
There you go, in the book. Are you still teaching? Are you traveling and teaching yet, or?
Not well. I'm due to travel just sort of west in east in England a little bit, just a sort of few miles away from here, at the end of August, which is actually a kind of backstrap rigid heddle course that I do for beginners, together with a friend of mine, Deirdre Wood. We've been doing this jointly for some time, and that's a really nice college called Westdean, where they have a lot of crafts. Well, we were all set to do one, and then the pandemic struck, so that was the end of that. And so we're due to do another one next month. So that'll be quite nice, because that's there's been everything I was supposed to do in terms of teaching and giving lectures and everything was stopped. So I mean, I've done some talks on Zoom, but obviously you can't. There's a limited, particularly with this very kind of hands-on sort of stuff. There's a limit to what you can do, over Zoom. Yes, you do really need to be there. So yeah, I am still doing some teaching, but I don't. I mean, it's interesting. I did go back to the college in February to do some tutorials for the students, but I don't go there regularly. And in fact, I won't be going there anymore, because unfortunately they're closing down the course, which I'm really sad about. They're going to have a new textile course combined with fashion, so there won't be very much weaving in it, just a little bit, along with other things. So I am, it's curious. I felt the new book was sort of, in a way, a homage to the course, the wonderful course that I went on, that has made so much difference to me. And if I'd known, they were going to close it, I think I've dedicated the book to the course, but I didn't know at the time.
Well, I can't believe that it's time to stop.
Okay, well, thank you very much. It's been very interesting to talk to you.
Such a wonderful afternoon. I hope you'll be teaching soon. I wish you would come to the US again and come to Convergence and teach. I would love to take your class.
Well, thank you.
How can people find out more about your work and you? if they have questions or anything?
Well, I haven't got a website, and I used to belong to the Cross Council, but I sort of came out of that because I was doing more teaching and not so much trying to find customers to buy things. So really, there's just my Instagram, which is, or when I'm on Facebook as well, but Instagram is, I'm just Anne Richards Weave. And I've got a little, there's a little video on there actually of me finishing a bracelet. If anybody's not familiar with what it actually looks like when you put this high twist yarn in water, it's a little short, just less than a minute, as I put a bracelet in the water and it crinkles up. Yeah.
Well,
so yeah, Instagram is, I don't have a website, it's just Instagram. Really. Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Okay.
Well, we do want to thank Anne today. I encourage you all to take a look at her book. If you like what you heard today, there's lots more in both of her books. Thank you so much for being here today. And I do want to thank Denise Kovnat, who's a wonderful artist in herself. She's here at Convergence, teaching away. Thank you, Denise, for supporting Textiles and Tea and Anne's episode today. And if you would like to support Textiles and Tea and sponsor an episode, you can do that by going to weavespindye.org. You can go online and register for a class, a sponsorship. You can call me at the office and we'll get you set up. We do want to thank one of our special sponsors who are at Convergence for us. And again, we are here at Convergence. It's been wild and wonderful. We had Well Before and Clear Mask. They provided us with many, many masks. Everybody had lots of masks. We were able to change out every day and not have to wear the same one. And these lovely clear masks came in very, very handy for teachers and the vendors so that they could talk and people be able to understand what they're saying a little bit better. So thank you to both of those folks, Well Mask and Well Before and Clear Mask. We do appreciate that. We want to thank everyone for supporting HGA and all the programs that we offer. And again, keep in mind that these programs are made possible by the donations to the Fiber Trust. If you like Textiles and Tea, Spinning and Weaving Week, all those programs, please go online and either join or donate or both to weavespindye.org. If you missed part of this episode and you want to watch it again, you can go to the Facebook or you can watch it on YouTube. We will have both of those. And I think that's all today. And I do want to thank everybody for being at Convergence. It was so wonderful to see people. I've seen you make comments and to actually meet them. And you might want to talk to somebody who was at Convergence because we announced where we're going next in 2024. We look forward to see you all there. Thank you all so much for joining us today. Next week, we're going to have Eric Frazzino. We're excited about having that. And have a great day and happy tea.